Okay, this is our graphing sine, cosine, and tangent notes. So you'll see that these all have periodic, they continue on from point to point. But you will hear me say that we'll talk about some cheats to be able to graph these nicely. And what you'll hear me say for sine is you'll hear me say 0, max, 0, min, 0. These are our y values, and we will find our x values that go with them when we actually start to graph. Okay, so 0, max, 0, min, 0. For cosine, my cheat is max, 0, min, 0, max. Okay, that's my cheat for cosine. Tangent. Now, tangent looks a little funkier because you'll notice that it has pieces. It has a vertical asymptote. Okay, so my cheat for tangent is undefined, negative a, 0, a, and then undefined. Undefined would be where the vertical asymptotes are. Okay. So a tangent function is undefined for certain values of x. Therefore, the function has vertical asymptotes, like we just talked about. So it has vertical asymptotes. The tangent function does not have an amplitude, but we will use it to, we'll talk about amplitude on how to graph those 2 points. The length of any cycle, that is called a period. And we can start at any point on the graph. But one thing I will say, for sine and cosine functions, when we start the graph, we're going to start at x equals 0. Okay. For tangent, we're going to start at negative pi over 2. Okay. We're going to start at negative pi over 2. Half the distance between the minimum and maximum values, that is called your amplitude. It's called your amplitude. And you're going to see that we have some general equations here. So f of x equals a times the sine of bx, or a cosine of bx. A, that's your amplitude, your coefficient in front of your sine or cosine function. B is going to help you find your period. So the amplitude is always going to be the absolute value of a. And your period for a sine or cosine function is going to be 2 pi divided by b. 2 pi divided by b. Okay, for sine and cosine. For tangent, things change a little bit. Your period is now pi, or pi over b, I should say. Pi over b, and the asymptotes are odd multiples of pi over 2. Okay, period 2 pi for sine and cosine, and the period is just pi for tangent. Now what we're going to do on the front here is just identify the amplitude and the period of each function. So what's my coefficient here? For number 1, my amplitude is 1. And my period, since it's a sine function, so it's 2 pi over 4, which is the same as pi over 2. Number 2, my amplitude is my coefficient, so 7/2. And my period is 2 pi over b. There's no coefficient of x, so it is just 2 pi. For number 3, my amplitude, remember it's the absolute value, so my amplitude is 5. And my period is 2 pi divided by 1/3, because my coefficient of x is 1/3. So my period is 6 pi. 4, my amplitude is 2. My period is pi over 3, because my coefficient of x is 3. And my period is only pi because it's a tangent function. Number 5, my amplitude is 2. And my period, 2 pi divided by 4/3. So that's become 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2. And the last one, my amplitude is 1/2. And my period is pi divided by 2/5, which is the same as 5 pi over 2. 5 pi over 2. So hopefully you understand what the amplitude and how to find the period. Now we're going to graph some of these. And you're going to see we're going to graph sine and cosine a little bit differently than tangent. All right, so you're going to find that I do this. I will have my amplitude, my period, and you'll see I'm going to put a letter Q over there. It's going to stand for my quad, and it's going to help me graph it. So my period is the absolute value of 2, which is 2. My period is 2 pi over b, so in this case it is just 2 pi. And my quad is always my period divided by 4. So in this case 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. Now, I'm going to use that when I graph them so I can find my x values. Okay, so if I did x and y, so it's a sine function, so it's 0, max, 0, min, 0. Okay? And you're going to start at 0 unless you have a phase shift. So today we're going to start at 0. Okay? So I'm going to start at 0. And you're going to get to your next point, next x value, you're going to add your quad. So 0 plus pi over 2, that is pi over 2. Pi over 2 plus pi over 2, that's 2 pi over 2, which is the same as pi. Add pi over 2 again, that's 3 pi over 2. Add pi over 2. Add pi over 2 again, that is 2 pi. Okay, so when I graph that, I have 0, 0 right there, and I'm going to make that pi, and this 2 pi usually go by pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi every 1/4. So 0, 0. So then pi over 2 would be here, and it's my maximum, so that means I'm going to go up my amplitude. Boom, boom. Now I come back down to pi, and I'm back at my 0, I'm back at my y value. 3 pi over 2 is my minimum. So if my maximum was going up 2, that means my minimum, I'm going to go down my amplitude, and I come back to my 0. And there's my first sine function. There's my first sine function. Now for this next one, this graph is not the best, so I'm going to actually move my 0 down to here. I apologize for that. All right, so pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, and 4 pi. Okay, my amplitude is still the absolute value of 5, so that's 5. My period is 2 pi divided by 1/2, because that's my coefficient of x. So my period is 4 pi. My quad is my period divided by 4, so that is pi. So I'm going to make my chart. It makes my life a little bit easier. It's how I like to do it. So max, 0, min, 0, max. Now, cosine function, we usually start at 0 unless there's a phase shift. We'll talk about that later. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to add pi every time till I end. So 0 is my maximum. My maximum means I go up my amplitude, come back down to 0. Now I'm at 2 pi, I must show my minimum. Come back to 0, and go back to my maximum. Nice stretched out cosine function. Okay, this next one, amplitude, is 5/2 because it's the absolute value of A. My period is 2 pi divided by 2/3. So that is 6 pi over 2. So my period is 3 pi. And my quad is my period divided by 4. Okay, now with this one though, I have that negative. So when the negative is out front, that means it reflected over the y-axis. So it's going to flip. So whenever it's a max, it's now going to be a min. 0 stay the same. When it was a min, it becomes a max, and vice versa. Start at 0, add my quad. Okay, and I'm going to make each of these pi's to make it fit on my graph. So those are pi's over 2, and then pi over 4. Okay, so I'm going to start at 0, and my minimum, so it means I need to go down to 2.5. 3 pi over 4, so 1, 2, 3 pi over 4 is back at my 0. 1, 2, 3 is at my maximum, so 1, 2.5. 1, 2, 3 is back at my 0. 1, 2, 3 is back at my minimum, and should end where you want it to. So there's that next one. Okay, the fourth one here, my amplitude is 4. My period, 2 pi divided by b. b is 2, so my period is pi. So it means my quads are my period divided by 4. There's no flipping, so I go 0, max, 0, min, 0. Start at 0 because it's a sine function. And add my quad. So you're adding pi over 4 every single time. So 0, 0. Remember, this is x and this is y. And then pi over 4, my maximum. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 0 and 0. Okay, nice sine and cosine graphs. Okay, tangent graphs. Okay, I still want my amplitude, I still want my period, and I still want my quad. Okay, so my amplitude is the absolute value of that initial coefficient, or that coefficient in front of my sine or cosine or tangent function. So my amplitude is 1. Period, remember, period is pi divided by b in this case, so that is 2 pi. Quad is found the same way, it's 2 pi divided by 4. So this is pi over 2. Now, this one is undefined, negative a, 0, a, undefined. Remember, those undefined are my vertical asymptotes. This is a little bit harder one. This one we're going to start at negative pi over 2. We're going to start at negative pi over 2. And at negative pi over 2, I have a vertical asymptote. Okay, now I add pi over 2, so that's 0. This is pi over 2. This is pi. And that is 3 pi over 2. Okay, so 0. Now at 0, when x is 0, I have negative a. So it means I'm going to go down my asymptote. I'm going to be at 0. I'm going to go up my asymptote. And I end just a stretched out tangent function. Just a stretch out tangent function. Now for this one, my last one here. My a is going to be 3. My period is pi divided by 2/3. So that's 3 pi over 2. And my quad is 3 pi over 2 divided by 4. So that's the same as 3 pi over 8. All right. So I start at negative pi over 2. So it's undefined. Negative a, 0, a, undefined. Now I'm adding 3 pi over 8. So this is like negative 4 pi over 8. So this is negative pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, which is pi over 4, 5 pi over 8, and it ends at pi. Okay, so negative pi over 2, we have our undefined. Now, if this is negative pi over 2, this is negative pi over 4, so these are 8. So negative pi over 8, I'm at negative amplitude, so I'm going to go down 3. So I go 1, 2, 3. I'm at pi over 4, which just makes sense. I'm at 0, 1, 2, 3, 5 pi over 8. I go up, and I end at pi. And there is that.